僕が最高のヒーローになるまでの物語だ。最高のヒーローになるために。
Why does he have to keep repeating it? From the beginning of My Hero Academia, we've been told constantly, almost incessantly, that Deku is going to be the greatest hero. Now, I know that this might be more of the anime's fault, but it's just a constant again and again. And you even go to see the movie and...
そんな最高のヒーローに。
Really? Really? Shh! But have you ever wondered why we needed to be told this from the beginning? Like, what does that even do for the story? Well, I've been thinking about this a lot. And the reason I'm bringing it up is that about 2 months ago, during a sudden spike in My Hero Academia criticisms in the community, one particular complaint that stuck in my mind was how the narrative tension of My Hero Academia was ruined by knowing Deku's going to become the greatest hero in the end. Personally, I've never found this to be an issue because there are several stories that let you know how they end, and the whole appeal is being able to get to know why they unfold this way. This has been done since as far back as the ancient Greeks, and it's also why prequels exist in the first place. Also, when it comes to shonen, many fans often tend to complain that it's so obvious that the main characters are just gonna win anyway, that My Hero Academia might have just done us a service by deciding to just get that fact out of the way. However, as someone who does enjoy high stakes and page-turning tension, I can understand how knowing the end to his journey might lessen the excitement for some viewers, and I can even see how some of them might find that boring. But this also greatly depends on how you're thinking about it, because often it's presumed greatest hero implies being number one. But from the themes My Hero Academia focuses on, it seems to be more than just about becoming the strongest, and it also seems to be more than just about Deku. Therefore, knowing that Deku will become the greatest hero allows the story to gradually shift its focus toward expanding our understanding of hero society, getting us invested in Class 1A as an ensemble, and showing us the limitations of the symbol of peace, all of which come together to bring more meaning to Deku's journey and emphasize the importance of his one true talent. Knowing the endpoint for Deku's arc right from the start frees up the narrative to expand outside of Deku because it makes it all about the how. It's no longer a question of will he, it's how is he going to become the greatest hero? And in order to understand this, we need to understand first the world he's living in, what he'll be dealing with as a hero, specifically when he grows up. So how does the show do this? Well, My Hero Academia loves showing gradual progression, ranging from how it develops its characters down to the way it likes to present its ideas. And the most effective way it does this is by using Deku's heroic journey as our starting point, to get us acquainted with Hero Society, and then as he develops in his powers, the show starts to gradually shift away from him in order to ease us into more complex issues with this type of society at large. So first, let's take a look at what the show is trying to tell us about society before we go back to Deku. So for example, the first few arcs are mostly focused on Deku proving himself at UA until it reaches the USJ arc, which introduces us to the series' main antagonist, Shigaraki, presenting the first real disruption to the status quo in society and planting a seed for a far bigger and much more sinister plan that has been set into motion. With the following arc, we get the highly publicized UA Sports Festival, which is where the narrative begins to expand its focus to the other characters of Class 1A, as well as introduce us to the public's perception of heroes. As the USJ arc allowed us to see Class 1A working together as an ensemble, here we're able to see them shine as individuals with their own ideals and motivations for being heroes. We're also able to get more of a sense of that heroism really is treated as more of a profession in this world rather than just a noble cause. However, the point at which the narrative really begins to shift outward is with the Hero Killer Stain arc, which serves as the student's first real glimpse into the real world and the first time we hear a direct criticism of the problems inherent with the pro-hero system, such as creating heroes that are self-interested and corrupt rather than selfless and just as they're supposed to be. Or at least that's what we've been led to believe. Even though this is the first time we hear a character actually call out these problems, the show has been implying it right from the very first episode, with Mount Lady being a prime example of a self-serving hero simply in it for the fame. Up until this point, the show has continually portrayed pro-heroes as high-status professions that really just make them out to be no more than stars and minor celebrities. Stain serves to bring this to a head, with both his stern condemnation of this hypocrisy coupled with his bloodthirsty conviction to make his message felt. Because of this, his ideology is able to spread and resonate so deeply with the public that they start selling stain merchandise, elevating him as some sort of idol that represents society's need for reformation. Therefore, the aftermath of this arc lays a foundation for every arc after this to be connected in some way with the growing unease in society. And from here, the series starts to take a more noticeable focus on developing Class 1A as a unit, with specific emphasis on how their shared experiences together allow them to grow further. Which goes back to the show's love of gradual progression, because as Stain-inspired villains start to emerge, it creates both a sense of uncertainty and urgency in the UA faculty that are just trying their best to make it possible for the students to retain some semblance of a school life while still preparing them for whatever may come. This is most evident with the final exams arc and the forest training camp arc, where the teachers make the students come face to face with their own weaknesses and train them to develop their abilities further. What I love about this is that it illustrates that even though they're still in school, the students are just as affected by what's going on, because their future professions aren't isolated, but rather directly defined by the current state of society. This idea is only driven further home when Bakugo gets captured and UA has to deal with the public fallout, which threatens not only their reputation, but the reputation of all pro heroes across the board. However, while this is going on, the teachers are just as focused on protecting their students and being able to continue teaching them. Even when All Might is facing All for One in his final battle, his primary motivation for making it out alive is to be able to nurture Deku properly until the day that he's ready to fully take on the mantle. Because the transition of one hero generation to the next is central to My Hero Academia, and One for All is essentially the embodiment of this theme. That's why this transition fully commences both figuratively and literally when All Might is forced to retire as both the symbol of peace and wielder of One for All. The leftover embers of One for All fully vacate his body, and the torch is officially passed to Deku, who is now the sole wielder that's fated to face off against All for One's successor, Shigaraki. With this passing of power, the scope and stakes for the entire series are dramatically raised as heroes are forced to take a hard look at themselves and think about how they can stack up to All Might's legacy and a world without a symbol. Because it was the peace that All Might brought that allowed pro heroes to exist in the first place. He was able to remove the burden off everyone else to pursue heroism however they wanted. No threat was too great for him, as he was a solo act that could pretty much handle everything. And this was perfect for expanding a system that had already been built on a flawed foundation. And the show has been gradually revealing this flawed foundation bit by bit, because from what we've been shown already about the workings of its world so far, Hero Society is highly regulated. As Chief Zurugamai explained to Deku, Todoroki, and Ida after their encounter with Stain, when superpowers were first entering society, the priority of the police was to ensure that quirks were not used as weapons. And this is where the profession of heroes came in, to set those standards for the rest of society. They were meant to be role models and examples for the sake of maintaining order. And to give you more of an idea of this, Fourth Kind explains to Kirishima and Tetsu during their internship, pro heroes are essentially just civil servants because they receive their wages from the government. Even if their duties do differ a bit from an actual civil servant, they still have responsibilities. They're responsible for controlling crime, filing reports, in order to get paid. And that's only after it's been evaluated and approved by the government. Therefore, pro heroes aren't as autonomous as their status and titles would have you believe. They can't even make arrests without the police. Granted, all of this makes sense as the most efficient way to keep a superpowered society from falling back into chaos. But this approach still comes with so many problems, which the series keeps reminding us about the more we progress into the story. To put it into perspective, with quirks being equated to weapons, if you don't have a hero license, you can't use your own quirk to defend yourself. You just need to wait and hope that a hero saves you. If not, you either die, or if you use your quirk, you'd be persecuted and treated like a villain for going against the law, like what happened with Gentle Criminal, regardless of whatever your dreams may be, your actual intentions. Again, this is all to maintain the status quo in a society where weaker quirk users would constantly be at the mercy of more powerful quirk users if these laws weren't in place. But the downside is that it perpetuates a learned powerlessness in ordinary citizens, such as with Deku in the beginning, and this in turn creates an inequality among quirk users. People whose quirks don't fit the standard mold of being either useful, combat-oriented, or even hero-like are barred from the competition. The best example of this is Shinzo from UA's General Studies course, who's burdened with two of these disadvantages. Even though he has an incredibly powerful brainwashing quirk, he wasn't able to pass the practical portion of UA's entrance exam because it favors combat-oriented quirks. On top of that, he's been determined to become a hero his whole life, but because of the nature of his quirk, everyone around him has always discriminated against him and deemed him to be a future villain. Then we have cases of quirks being incompatible with their users, such as Twice, whose quirk literally made him go insane, or even Aoyama, who physically can't handle his naval laser quirk without severe consequences to his stomach. There are people that have succeeded in spite of the odds, like Best Jeanist, Aizawa, and Mirio, but they all had to work extremely hard to find practical uses for their quirks when everyone else around them just doubted that they ever could. Society has a bias towards flashy and impressive quirks, and they spend their time glorifying and exalting them as hero-worthy, in a similar way to how Bakugo was treated for most of his childhood in comparison to Deku. Because of this, the system doesn't only create heroes out of the chosen few, but also villains out of the many others that are left feeling they have nowhere they belong. All of this illustrates that My Hero Academia is about a failing system that needs correcting, and how each side is affected by those shortcomings. Even though it desperately needs to be addressed, heroes can't actually do anything about it because they're the enforcers of this system, and they're bound by it. Through the show's commitment to keep presenting us with different perspectives and the range of effects, both good and bad, that the advent of quirks has had on people, the true villain seems to be society itself. And as perfect as All Might was, he also couldn't do anything about it. In fact, I'd go so far as to say he was just as responsible for it. The second function of the premise is that it's constructed to seem very clear from the outset, but it's actually vague enough to take on different meanings over the course of the story. My Hero Academia is very aware of the tropes that are usually associated with battle shonen, and it executes them in a way that always serves to play into its overall message, which in this case so far has been about addressing society's needs. With that said, for some reason we don't seem to question the implications of Deku becoming the greatest hero. Of course, why would we? The show lays it out so obviously for us. When we first hear him tell us this line, he's standing right in front of the current #1 hero, who's also his idol. So it's safe to assume it means his journey is about him becoming the strongest, as that's what we tend to assume most battle shonens are about. But what if that's what it wants us to think? What does it actually mean to be the greatest hero? Now, I don't doubt that the story will deliver on its promise of making Deku the greatest hero, but considering the narration is from Deku in the future, it's quite possible that an older Deku's idea of greatest hero can differ greatly from a younger Deku's ideal. This is why we first need to examine what exactly Deku is striving to become. Just like Deku represents the show's love of gradual progression, All Might represents legacy. Specifically the idea of building on what came before. However, he's a tough act to follow considering he's the perfect incarnation of One for All. I mean, he's been able to inspire so many people and made so many of them want to be heroes in the first place. He's powerful, loved by all, and he's not just the #1 hero, he's the ultimate image of a hero, considering he towers far above all of the heroes beneath him. If Endeavor is what you'd consider the quintessential rock star of business executives, then All Might would be considered the Dalai Lama, because it's not just a job for him, this is his life's work. There is so much conviction in his eyes for what he does that is what sets him apart from all the rest. So how could Deku possibly not think he needs to be All Might when All Might hasn't left any room for him to be anything else? All Might already embodies the perfect image. However, if you take a step back and take an objective look at All Might's career as a hero, for as much good as he brought to the world, in some sense, he also failed. Because when you think of it from the bigger picture, once All Might established himself, he became very reactive. He would see evil being done and he would swiftly quash it. He would put villains away and would make society feel secure. And while this all worked out great while he was still active, many of these actions were short-term band-aids instead of long-term solutions. It made society too reliant on him to come save the day. And while one could argue that it wasn't really his duty to figure out society's issues because heroes are still just civil servants that are bound to the flawed system, All Might was just as flawed in that he kept trying to do everything himself instead of relying on others, instead of sharing the burden. While this is fine as a personal preference, when you have a duty to society to bring about the greatest good, that's a problem. He chose his pride as a symbol above all else instead of figuring out a way to bring about a lasting peace for society, beyond just finding a successor to continue doing the same thing. Now, I don't blame him. For one, hindsight is 20/20. And 2, it's not in All Might's character. All Might is intelligent, but from comments Gran Torino and others have made about him, he's also been so singularly focused on preserving the symbol this whole time at any means that he hasn't had to factor in the strengths of other people. He doesn't really think much outside of his own powers. He's been able to brute force his way through everything, that he hasn't had to focus on the nuances. The only time that All Might was able to break out of this mindset is in that one moment he saw Deku running with all his might to save Bakugo. In that one moment, Deku was able to remind him of why he chose to be a hero in the first place. And he was deeply moved by it, because he realized that Deku, even though powerless, possessed something even he didn't have with all his perfection. This is why he chose Deku, because while their desire to save people is the same, they're fundamentally different when it comes to their approach. All Might had a vision and took it upon himself to see it through with his own hands. He's the type that looks at suffering in the world and then proceeds to look inwardly and ask, what can I do to make a difference? It's his vision and conviction in making it come to life that inspired Shimura Nana to give him One for All. Deku, on the other hand, is both receptive and responsive to other people's emotions. He's so aware of the other people around him that he compares himself to them, and he looks to them for validation. But because he's so hyper-aware, if he sees someone in trouble, there's not much of a question in his mind. It's more of, I need to do something. The difference is subtle, but Deku is purely interested in being able to save people and bring a smile to their faces because that's what All Might was able to do for him as a kid. He's not interested in fighting, being at the top, or even being some symbol. He just wants to be there for people. He's with them on the ground floor because he is them. He's the helpless boy whose dreams were crushed as a child, but in spite of that pain, he was determined to keep dreaming, to keep admiring heroes, and one day become the person he so desperately wanted to be. This is also why he clashes with Bakugo, because of their different ideologies of what it means to be a hero, the different things they took from All Might. But as Deku faces the reality that he has to win in order to actually save people, he also has to come face to face with the fact that in order to win, he can't be like All Might, because what works for All Might doesn't work for him. All Might was dedicated to preserving what he created, and because he was always able to handle it all himself, he never had a need to question it. However, that was All Might's fatal flaw, which Deku hasn't even been able to fully recognize yet. Because All Might never needed to rely on others for help, that's what both limited his reach and led to his early retirement. All Might spent so much time being the symbol that he forgot he was still just a human. He didn't want to listen to Night Eye because he was too insecure about letting the public see his weakness. He had already built up this image, this symbol. He didn't want to break that. Deku's journey is the opposite. It's all about the questioning, from the insecurities to trying to figure out how to actually use his powers without breaking his body. It's not like All Might, who just got the powers and was just instantly able to run with it. Deku has to gradually adapt, and that's a lot more difficult. It's also what perpetuates his feeling of unworthiness in him. But the reality is, no one can be like All Might. Even Endeavor, who tried for years to surpass All Might, had to finally concede he could never embody that same perfection. He was too flawed. For this reason, the world does not need another All Might. He sacrificed his humanity and livelihood just to become a symbol, and that's a lonely existence. The whole point of One for All is that it's power that isn't just passed on, it's power that's been molded by each person that came before. So when it reaches the next wielder, he doesn't possess a finished product. He carries the will of everyone that made this power possible, who entrusted it for generations to the next person and the next, to either finish what they started or to add their own unique strength to it and continue passing it on until the day their hopes are redeemed. It's a group effort. All Might just happens to be the one who cultivated One for All to the peak of its physical power. But all that power means nothing if the only person holding it falls. That's why Deku is meant to pick up from where he left off and forge a new path ahead, a different one that works for him. Because the past isn't a blueprint, it's just a guideline that comes with the added hope that maybe this time they'll get it right. When it comes down to it, the label of greatest hero, or greatest anything for that matter, is subjective. Specifically, it's a perception in people's minds. If this is the case, then how can someone gain the label? Well, it has to be agreed upon by the collective society, which is heavily influenced by fulfilling the needs of the people in it. Because of this, it can't simply be measured by a numerical value in a hierarchy. It's not just about power, it's about giving value to other people. What can you impart to the world that goes beyond? This is where Deku comes in, with the only innate ability that he has that can not only surpass, but evolve what All Might has set in motion. However, before anything can change, there are two problems that need to be addressed first. One is that a society doesn't get better without the people in it taking an active role in making that happen. As we've seen, Hero Society's issues are so nuanced that what it requires is constant examination and re-evaluation of what's still lacking and how to improve it. It's an ongoing process that involves learning about and considering other viewpoints different from our own. And the second problem is that Deku is far from the hero society even wants. He's too self-sacrificing, insecure, and he lacks the will to win on his own. This is why Deku's story is about self-improvement. He serves to link society to his own journey. So what do I mean by that? Well, from the beginning, Deku's development has been directly connected to how My Hero Academia likes to world build. If you've noticed, his powers only ever progress enough to be able to expand our view of society. By making him an outsider who has suddenly gained entry into a world he's always admired from the sidelines, he's seeing and experiencing many things for the first time, and through this, we as the audience are able to learn with him as he gets stronger and encounters new challenges. For example, during the UA Sports Festival, by keeping him from being able to use his powers without severe drawbacks, we're able to learn crucial information, such as the previous successors of One for All being able to come to his aid, the disadvantages of not having an ideal quirk, and most importantly, Todoroki's backstory and his relationship with Endeavor. This wouldn't have been possible if Deku was simply trouncing through the competition. Once Deku progresses to learning Full Cow, it's exactly what he needs to reach Ida in time and to hold his own against Stain, because it's through this confrontation that we're able to learn about Stain's extreme ideology, but most importantly, Deku comes face to face with what real conviction looks like as the image of Stain's intense aura engraves itself into his mind. If Deku was simply still breaking his fingers, the story would have remained focused solely on him as he struggled to keep up and wouldn't have been able to readily react to the events unfolding around him, much less give us more insight into how society is regulated. After this point in the story, Deku's development starts to become more subtle, because it becomes less about him being able to use his powers, and more about how he uses his powers. This is why he doesn't get significantly stronger for the next few arcs, because he reaches the exact point where he needs to be in order to receive a few much needed reality checks. These come in the form of him permanently damaging his arms, and the anguish both he and Class 1A feel from experiencing their first devastating loss when they aren't able to prevent Bakugo's capture. In effect, these setbacks force him to start thinking more responsibly, as he's able to hatch a successful plan that not only manages to retrieve Bakugo, but also safely gets himself and everyone else out of All for One's vicinity. However, the biggest and most crucial reality check comes from a now retired symbol of peace, who essentially puts the ball in Deku's court to finally face the biggest thing holding him back, his idealization of All Might. Deku possesses a strength that even All Might completely lacked. It's the strength to inspire others to action, to empower them. While All Might did inspire people, they were mostly in awe of his great power, and it made them want to believe in him. However, Deku makes people feel like they have the power to accomplish things themselves. This is what the flawed hero society needs. Everyone feeling like they too can have a part in making a difference. What holds Deku back is that he hasn't learned to hone this strength for himself. He lacks the initiative to seek justice with his own hands, and it's something All Might can't help him with. But that doesn't mean he hasn't started to take steps in that direction. Constantly being forced into a corner where Deku has had to identify the right course of action without getting himself or the other students hurt has made him more adept at planning with other people in mind. And what works so well about this is that many times Deku isn't able to accomplish these things on his own, but instead of being shown as a weakness, it leads to a mutually beneficial exchange. They lend Deku their power, and in return, he arranges and combines their different strengths to come up with the best solution. That's exactly what this hero society needs for a lasting, self-sustaining peace. It needs balance and equal exchange. This is why I think Deku is meant to embody something that goes beyond the symbol of peace. Because if you think about it, the peace that was created by All Might was always going to be temporary, as it was solely being held up by his shoulders. But as we saw with his severe wound and his sickly body, no matter how mighty All Might appeared to the public, he was still just a human, and having one human hold up an entire society isn't sustainable. It's ridiculous. The show has consistently framed the glorification of certain individuals over others as being detrimental to society. Those that are less talented are quite possibly still just as capable with the proper nurturing, but the problem is no one wants to take the time to think about it. It's easier to dismiss them. Deku may have the strongest quirk in existence, but it's not about strength or status for him. It's about giving back. He even says it himself during his fight with Overhaul, that he just wants to have enough strength to not make anyone worry about him anymore. Deku recognizes how much people have supported him to get him to where he is, from his mother to classmates to mentors. He wasn't blessed with a resilient body like All Might's that could just naturally handle One for All. He doesn't have innate talent like Bakugo, or even an inspiring story like Mirio, where he was able to overcome adversity by himself. Deku just keeps on struggling. So maybe, just maybe, Deku becoming the greatest hero doesn't necessarily mean becoming number one. After all, he's plain and doesn't fit the image of a hero. He cries easily and is afraid of conflict. He can't do it on his own, and he knows that. There are so many others more qualified for the job, but that's why he was chosen. His journey is defined by constant struggle and a perpetual feeling of unworthiness. So then, how does he still succeed? His mind is open to working with others and learning from them. By being surrounded by positive influences, Deku's able to start taking his first steps forward to finding his own will to do justice. We can see this clearly when he pursues Gentle Criminal on his own because of how much the Culture Festival means for his classmates who have worked so hard on it in order to make Eri regain her smile. And by taking it upon himself to confront Gentle, he's able to get his first real win. This is the best way to show that Deku is the sum of all the people around him. They propel him forward. And I think the biggest and my personal favorite example of this is during his training for the provisional license exam. Because of the consequences of his reckless actions, he's left with no choice but to reduce the strain he puts on his arms. So what does he do? He looks back on his experiences. By first receiving hands-on training from Gran Torino during his internship, then fighting alongside Ida against Stain, and finally going to save Bakugo, he's able to combine all of their movements that he observed during the time he spent around them to develop his shoot style, his first significant step away from All Might's shadow. Because what you realize is that up until this point, he's just been asking for permission to be a hero, to stand on the same stage. But to really make this meaningful, this was forged by the geeky Deku who became adept at observing and studying the moves of heroes he's always admired, in the hopes of one day being able to stand among them. This is his own strength, the strength to rally others together, whether physically or in spirit, and through their combined strength, he's able to build on what came before. This is exactly why he can tap into One for All in a way that All Might never could. One for All hears the cries of those in need, and because Deku can't do it on his own, they come to his aid to support him. The quirk itself arose from one who was in need of others' help in order to defeat All for One, and he entrusted that to the future. Deku is the culmination of that future, a future where heroes come together, because it's his image that makes him so accessible, that inspires others to want to stand with him. If All Might was the pinnacle of heroes, Deku is the one that doesn't have it all together, but tries his damnedest to make a difference in spite of it. And that's contagious. It makes people say, well, if Deku can do it, so can we. That's why I believe the title of greatest hero might just mean the hero that can inspire even greater heroes to come forth. Because a great leader knows when to let others lead. It's not about status, it's partly about bringing forth the greatest good for society, and partly about finding the courage to own your journey among others that may seem to be more extraordinary. Because society can't truly progress if it's always one for all. In return, they need to rally around the one individual so it can also be all for one. And if for some reason you're still watching this far into the video, then you've reached the end of the video. My Hero Academia has been getting a lot of unneeded criticism for a while that I felt had been missing the point for the most part, so it was important to me to help bring a bit more understanding. And if you feel like I did, here's how you can help me. By kindly pressing that like button, it'll help YouTube realize that the video is good, which will allow it to increase its reach. And in effect, other people can hear this message. And even if it doesn't change their mind, at the very least, it can open the possibility for more conversation. Productive conversation, I hope. But if you're anxious to start the conversation here, feel free to drop a comment letting me know what you love about My Hero Academia. And if you just like hearing me talk for however long this video was, feel free to subscribe. I'll be happy to have you. Besides that, I'm OniMaru, And, what was my line again?
I'll see you guys in the next video!
Oh, okay, what he said.